So now switching back to Redshift with the multiple explosions, here is the render that I got. We have the one that hits, and then we have the other guys land in. However, this is not the final result, as you guys well know. I did not do a good job shading this, and the motion of the spikes is also off a bit. It's just moving too still right now compared to the main plume. And even though we are pushing the velocity along with the main pyro plume, it's not enough. So for one, I did not like that. But in addition to that, we don't have motion blur. Again, motion blur with Redshift is just not really a thing until they do more updates. And on top of that, I had a corrupted cache file. So we had that kind of thing happen right there. And that pretty much ruined this entire render. So attempt number 2 did also not work. Why? Because I did not do a diligent enough job double checking my shading, and I did not pick up the corrupted cache file right there. It gave back a error of like a -1 byte found in the cache file, and that caused all kinds of issues. So I think I've told you guys enough by now to double check everything. These frames here took about 3 days in Redshift. You'll find that even though Redshift is a GPU renderer, it still takes a really long time if you're trying to bounce light throughout the volumes. It's still better than Karma because at least we're bouncing light. But, you know, some of these renders still took over 20 minutes to send out. So, you know, this is probably week number 2 that I've been trying to render this stuff out. And, well, that's when I decided to just keep things a bit more simple and just go with one explosion for the course. Just because, again, I'm working with one machine and I think one explosion looks better anyways, that's why I switched up the final render to be one thing. And also it takes a long time to try to really refine each one of these explosions to exactly what you want it to be. Now, why am I showing you guys all of my mistakes? Well, it's because of the fact that I want you to learn from what I didn't do well. And I think it's a good time to talk about better alternatives as far as how you might want to go about your average pyro project. What I mean by that is this. You don't necessarily need to have the pyro perfectly collide with the ground with every single project. What usually happens is that you have a wide library of pyro explosions that have already been made, and then you just drop them down where you want them to go, and even though it doesn't collide with the ground properly, you can still get away with the illusion or the effect in most situations. Especially because if something's flying by really fast and you have an explosion, it doesn't matter if it's perfectly colliding with something. You just need to have the overall explosion happening, and that's all you need. So in this particular situation, we could just make a different version of the same explosion hitting the same area of the ground. And we can just basically place and time shift the caches however we'd like. So that's one thing that I think is a better way to go for most situations. You will get a different shape of the pyro because you're working with a different ground collision that actually makes a pretty big impact on how the forces and the velocity bounces off of the collision volume. So do keep that in mind. But if it was me and I was trying to get ready for a studio gig or I was trying to prepare for whatever, what I would do is I would try to figure out a few explosions I like ahead of time, set it up, and then just drop down the cache files wherever I want them to be. So in other words, for most explosions, you only have to figure this out a small handful of times and then just drop the cache files where you want them to go. And that's going to take care of many situations you'll find on a gig. It's also good to see me struggle with these renders because it tells you that you need to really budget in a fair amount of time for rendering. And again, when you go to render, you need to double check, triple check, quadruple check everything from your shading, from your lighting, your cache files, everything. And well, if somebody was to pay me for, let's say, some pyro work, I would absolutely build into the schedule at least full day or two of doing those double checks, those triple checks. And in addition to that, it makes sense to enlist the help of a render farm, because if you're just doing this with one computer, especially multiple explosions, it's going to take you a really long time to render this out. Anytime you have GI and volumetrics, it takes your render times through the roof. So just be prepared for that. And if I didn't mention this, I'm working with a 1080. So if that gives you a frame of reference for rendering with Redshift, there you go. But even though we've had some struggles with those first two renderings, in the end, when I went back and changed up the shading, again, I did that trick with the lights where you kind of pinch in with two rims and just double checked everything one more time, we end up with this. So we are looking a lot better. Now there's still some issues that I tried to fix up in comp a little bit. First of all, you'll notice that the impact is looking way better, in my opinion. We don't actually have the glow here in these original frames. I tried to add the Redshift post effects features in comp, but I actually found that they didn't work as well as they do in the render view. So just FYI, if you're trying to use that comp node, I don't recommend it because it doesn't do as good of a job. But anyway, this explosion right here is looking really cool. The debris is awesome. The spikes are more subtle, which I really like. And I overall like the shape of the plume. We have that little camera shake going on. But then you'll notice that we do have some flickering happening right here for a little bit. So I'll try to go right there, and you can see that we are flickering like that. That is due to using a time warp on the cache. My computer actually crashed at about frame 175, and so for whatever reason, I'm not really sure when this was going to simulate. So what I did to cheat this is I used a time warp to slow down the plumes right around here. But because I wasn't planning on rendering motion blur, I did not render out the velocity field. And instead, when I used the time warp, I was trying to do it by voxel position, which causes this artifact. So a very complicated situation led to something like this. Fortunately, it's something that we can correct in comp, and I'll show you how to do that. But that's what's going on there. Also, I try to time the spikes so that they didn't disappear abruptly, but unfortunately, it happened right around there. So that's also an issue with this render. It's fairly minor though. I don't think your average person's really going to pick up on that. So I left it in there, but just FYI, that is also an issue with this. And it's also very grainy. Towards the end here, because we're scattering so much indirect light, these renders were taking about 32 to 35 minutes apiece. So that's why this ends at around 2:30. I spent about a whole week rendering this out. Well, maybe a little bit less than that. Probably about 5 or 6 days, something like that. But yeah, we have a lot of grain happening, a lot of noise, but the overall render looks really cool. So let me quickly show you what I did to fix this up in comp. This was looking good enough to smooth over in comp, in my opinion. So in comp, let me show you really fast what I did. I brought in the frames. I did the glow tricks that I showed you before with the chroma key. So one general bloom, and then one bloom that's a little bit tighter in on the highlights. That all layered on here with a screen operation. And then I did the same thing down here. So 2 layer cops right here to add in that glow. Now, to get rid of the flickering, what you can do is utilize a blend node. This blends frames together. So if I have a blend factor up here of 0.5, that means I'm taking half of one image and half of another image. And so the idea is that when we get to those frames that had the flickering, we're going to want to use the result that we get from here, because that gets rid of it. Now, that went to cache out to disk with this ROP comp. And let me pull up what that looks like. And after the denoised operation, it works really, really well. Now, this did take 7 hours to denoise it, but it did a really good job. So up to you if you have the time for that or not. But in this case, I think that it was definitely worth it. Well, my friends, that concludes Pyro 3. And in general, our study of Pyro. In the future, I'll probably update this course as new things come along, kind of like tagging at the end of this course, new updates. Definitely when Redshift comes out with changes, I'll be talking about that. But if you manage to make it all the way through this course, and I can actually see who has watched all the videos and who hasn't, if you are the rare person who has actually made it through all of these videos, and you've also gone ahead and rendered something out that you're proud of, I will give you a free session from CG Forge Academy. I will be happy to have a one-on-one consultation with you to talk about Pyro, to talk about where you want to go with this Pyro. And anyway, I just want to get in contact because I find that most people just kind of go their own way. And I really want to help promote your guys' work, get it out there, and help you make progress. So I hope that you found this course useful. I hope this goes well for you. Good luck with all of your studies. And until next time, I hope you have a fantastic day.